What's up, guys? Steven here today. And today, what I wanted to talk to you about is the importance of search. So, what the fuck am I babbling about now? Well, it occurred to me recently, especially as of late, that, I guess you can say one of the game changers for me recently has been delving into the search function of whatever platform I'm in. Now you can say, well, it's kind of obvious, I already know this shit, blah blah blah. But I feel like it's one of those underutilized mechanisms in most platforms, whether it's a website, whether it's a library, whether it's whatever. And the fact that it's so underutilized and thus consequently undervalued just mind boggles me if you actually take the time to ponder and reflect upon what search actually means. To kind of try to cap this all together, I will take you down story lane. Imagine eons ago that you are a scientist working for a government research facility by the name of ARPA, right? And say that at this time there was essentially, if you can think about it, everybody that you were working with was super fucking knowledgeable in their craft, in their field, right? Like deep level mastery. So whatever knowledge that they had to essentially convey was not only experiential, it was also foundational in the sense that the way that they delivered that information was so 360 full big picture painting that just listening to them, you knew the A to Z of whatever it was that they were talking about, right? Now, imagine that this, I guess, method of communication was essentially this like unwritten rule, right? Where like you didn't speak about something until you actually fucking knew it, right? Like kind of a whole like if you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, you shut the fuck up, right? So now, say that just like you, just because of it's like the passion, whatever, the nerd about the love for whatever it is your mastery is on, you have like this fucking plethora of notes that you've taken over the course of time on that shit, right? Things you jot down, ideas that coalesces into big ideas, coalesce maybe into like your framework, your perspective, your belief, your invention, your creations, whatever it is, right? You have all these fucking notes. So now, the day upon when you learn of one another, you're like, oh shit, let's get together and like put together our data, right? And so was born the concept of a database, right? Now, the thing is, in bringing everyone together, you realize that it's okay that there is a lot of information because luckily, we're only focusing to particular fields, right? Say at this time, essentially the most important topics were God, religion, science, which is essentially the human body or health, and then you can think of it as third is like the natural world. So like I'm talking about now. To concretely put it, hard sciences, smithing, right? Like cooking, right? Swag with thinking about it is like RuneScape, right? How like what I call those skills are foundational skills, or if you want, transferable skills, meaning they permeate upon every area of life, right? It's not just this thing where like you're trained to learn this technology or whatever, but it's just like multi-dimensional covering knowledge that allows you to just apply it in any domain or field that you find yourself in, right? That's actually essentially one of my grievances against most books you see today. It's more like commercial based shit, like selling or propaganda, but there's not many books that are like foundational building, or what I call teaching you these transferable skills, right? They're not teaching you the A to Z. They're just like, buy our shit, or look at how cool our shit is, right? But that's another tangent. So, anyways, because the I guess the scope of, or you could say the information that you guys all came together essentially tied to this particular field, it's okay that there was a lot of information. But the issue now, essentially, one issue that arose essentially that not only is it hard to find one particular piece of information, say like your notes page 5 in notebook 6, right? Not only is it hard because someone else also has a notebook 6 and a page 5, but then also now your way of speaking about it might be offshooting into a slightly different realm of that particular topic, right? So you get into categorizations essentially. And what I think one of the major issues we have with information nowadays, what I'm trying to say is like, because the way that you communicate might literally influence you to veer into another realm of knowledge, you might find yourself creating new categories or having overlaps in your knowledge that when you think about it may not necessarily be there. And so what that causes is like all these redundancies, or it causes all these you can say phantom subtopics, right? Topics that it sounds like it's real, but it's actually not if you think about it. Like it could just be grouped under that one thing, right? So going back, this is essentially birth database and birth of indexing, right? So how do we reference every single piece of content and make it to where it's uniquely referenced, right? And now you get into like the math whiz, the magician whiz, fucking finding a way of like tagging every single thing and making sure that like it's known, right? Now, an interesting thing that I wanted to say is that what if also you realize that the way that you built this knowledge, right, like this mastery, was by essentially knowing what you knew that the thing that you know about is not, which sounds kind of weird, but it's a subtle nuance in the sense that like what you're trying to do is you're always just painting what is there, what is there, what is there. It's kind of like you're shining your light in this darkness, and just the fact that you're constantly only focusing on what's factually there, it slowly just allows you to dilate, or what's the word? Is it? Yeah, dilate, meaning you're able to widen the scope of your light to where now, okay, I know this, so now let's look just a little further, or a little right. Let's look right next to the spot that I just shown, and right next to, 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 and right next to. Never trying to like grab at the whole thing, but just sequentially is what I'm trying to point at. It's like the sequential building upon of the knowledge that you're having mastery over. And this sequential building upon allows you to create what I call your foundation, because it's an incremental step, meaning that you do not move forward until you have fully internalized that which you are currently digesting, so to speak. And so what that means is it allows you to not to have holes in your knowledge or your understanding, right? Every question is fully answered before moving to the next level, because you'll realize that at a higher level, if you miss something at a high level, it will fucking be exposed essentially. And because there's so much momentum at that level, it's really hard to mitigate. Kind of like when people say it's easy to catch habits um, at a younger age because it's a lot easier to bring awareness on it. But when you're at like an older age, you're kind of just ingrained, and so you literally have to be shell shocked, so to speak, out of your normal mode of operation to actually become aware of whatever it is you're fucking up on, right? So to kind of go back, this is how they built that database. They only talked about what they knew, right? And it was a sequential thing. And so now, even though there was all these discrepancies, how it was solved was realizing, oh, he knows this, I know that. His language is the only thing that's actually changing the words. But if you think about it at their root essence, it's the same thing. And so it can still just remain one topic instead of instead of offshooting into realms, right? So my point is that this is how you're not only keeping your knowledge base or your database or your data clean, but it's also how you keep it lean, right? Because I think a lot of times, one of the cool aspects in today's world is the fact that you can capture everything. But then the thing is that in that, I feel like there is almost a sense of discipline that's lost in that we forget that we always have to constantly ask ourselves what is important, right? Because I always try to approach everything as if I don't have those tools, as if I literally have nothing. And when you approach everything that way, you become very economic, right? And it makes you very efficient. And it really makes you think about the value of the dollar, so to speak, right? So you don't try to be wasteful with your resources because you realize that they're precious. And so in that, you're not going to be capturing bullshit that makes no sense, even if they look impressive, right? Because at the end of the day, if you understand that for you to be at your best, your data has to be lean and clean, then that becomes a priority. And if your data is like bogged down and full of redundancies, at the end, you're actually out of business, right? So that's like an importance. And I think that was one of the hallmarks or capstones of these groups of people in this story, if you will, right? But it helps to essentially illustrate the idea that I'm tying into next. Because if you think about search now, what it's doing, you're not only essentially going into your data, but then you're also trying to find something specifically related to the search query, right? Meaning whatever keyword you put in, you're literally saying anything that looks like it might be what this query is asking for, pull it up. And so now if you think about what the fuck does that mean? What does might look like it would be what this query is asking for mean, right? That's when you get into some really interesting shit. And this is really the point of this video, because I was essentially going to go into what we call clusters. How, like, essentially, when you think about it, everything is tied to everything else, right? And this is actually where I'm going to actually start drawing shit. So if you can give me a second, I will go ahead and turn on my desktop capture. Okay, so let me just make sure everything is working. Intuos. Okay, so what I was saying is, if you think about it, it's kind of funny. I made notes on this video, and I essentially said, when an asteroid crumbles like a cookie, its fragments are hurled to nearby asteroid, which create a domino of collapsing asteroid. Hence the word galactica. Think of a cluster as a node holding the primary keyword to that particular body of work, right? Yeah, sanitizing counting algorithms, like for example, knowing, okay, for God or religion, the primary keywords would be faith or divine energy, right? Purpose, not even purpose, spirit, right? Soul. These like pillars of that particular body of work, right? And so what that does is through that keyword, it then generates this. If you want to call it supporting document or supporting materials that essentially help mainstay that body of work, right? So how I put it, it's kind of like this. And as you see, I actually mentioned Tumblr being one of the platforms that do this really well, right? So what happens is when you search for something, right? It's, say for example, you search for boobs, right? What's going to happen is it's going to generate all all the different topics that could be essentially related to boobs, right? This could be like big boobs. This could be like black girl boobs, right? This could be like booty and boobs, etc., etc., right? And so what happens is every time you select one of these, it then pulls it up. And then what happens is it then also queues up surrounding things that are more related to the one that you picked, right? So if, for example, this is like pog boobs, right? This is going to be now pog boobs, and then this is going to be something more related to pog boobs than boobs, right? And that's my point of clustering, right? That's one way of, that's one, essentially, one search mechanism, right? One efficient way of thinking about how do you go about solving this problem of what does it mean to pull up the information that this person asked for in a search query, right? Another one is essentially, obviously, Google, right? And if you think about it, Google, as we all know, is here's a search, right? And then what it does is first it goes through some sort of, like, you can call it a gate, right? Where you're saying who the fuck is asking this shit, right? And then from there, there's, I said, it's like mazes, right? Where another way of putting it, it's kind of like once you go through the security gate, like the first one, there is a whole bunch of, if you want to call it, checksum processes or protocols that essentially direct you precisely to whatever it is you ask for. So if it was a search query for a word, it will direct you to the maze that only deal with words. If it was a search query for like an image, it will direct you to the maze that only deal with images. If it was a search query for the video, it'll direct you to the maze, or if you want the lane that only deals with that. Then from there, there's another gate probably that essentially also asks, is this still the same person? If yes, then you're essentially granted access into the Holy Land, which is their database. Well, I don't even say database, it's like the Google ecosystem, right? And then from then on, there's another gate probably, and then it'll probably push you to whatever it is you're wanting, right? So that's another way of thinking about search, right? It essentially focus first on figuring out if what you're asking is in fact valid, and then from that point on grants you full access to whatever it has available to it, right? That's one other mechanism, right? And again, this is like over generalized points, and I know it's kind of like almost annoying to talk about it, but it'll make sense at the end, right? Another way of thinking about it is what's commonly known as fucking SEO, right? Where essentially what that means is you're saying, okay, think of it as like sculpting the data before it even gets there, right? So you're saying, okay, I want dog, right? And I know that if I write dog 5 times, then most likely I'm going to wind up in the data related to dog, right? Or another way of putting it, here's a body of knowledge, right? I want to be part of that body of knowledge. So I'm going to be using the primary keyword of that body of knowledge over and over and over, hoping that essentially I become, or I get essentially categorized as being part of that body of knowledge. It's really subtle, but essentially, I don't want to say forcing your way in, but you're kind of walking in under with a sheep clothing, essentially. And the reason why I'm pointing all this out is because, as I just said, or in my way of explaining how essentially SEO works, I'm hoping you basically now realize why I personally believe that growth methods or growth hacking or SEO tactics, if you will, in itself is actually counterproductive for you if you realize that over the long haul, these sanitizing mechanisms, you think, so you have a database, right? Imagine that the World Wide Web has like all the information collected within the World Wide Web is like housed into like one thing at the end, right? And say that whether people know it or not, it's actually being sanitized. Like someone or something is actually going through it and reading through every single piece of content, sifting through, ensuring if it's actually in the proper body of knowledge or if it's full of redundancy and should just be taken out. My point is, over time, this intelligence is getting smarter. It's only going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. So that means that if from the get-go you're coming at it from the approach that I'm going to just growth hack my way in, not only is it going to be detrimental to you the moment you get flagged, if you will, and essentially booted out, but it's going to have a lasting impact because in the future it's going to remember that there was a piece of content from this particular source, that is you, that essentially brought in so many redundancies, and it's actually going to be way more guarded. Like it's gonna have so much more scrutiny towards you than it ever would have, right? So that's my point. Just um, you can't fake. People say you can't fake the system, or you can't play the system, whatever. And even there's a saying in my country: 99 jours pour le volant, mais un jour pour le bâton, which directly translates to 99 days for the thief, but 1 day for the boss. I mean, you can get away with it forever, but that one time you're gonna get fucked, right? So that's my point to that. It's like just do things the right way, build content, like put out content that's actually valuable, so that, or with the mindset that you're literally contributing to that body of knowledge, not even to gain awareness or anything. And you will realize that at the end, you're going to gain way more than what you wanted, right? That's kind of my approach. So that's another way of thinking about it. It's probably like $1 million course on SEO right there for you for free. But anyways, after breaking all that down, really want to get to like the golden nug of this video, which is essentially, if you think about it, this leads to what I call the 3 common digital architectures, right? Or if you want to use infrastructure, that's fine too, right? In this context, I'm meaning I'll define this as a digital or a system, which is essentially a set of operations or processes with the pure and specific goal of achieving a perfect structure, which really is like, that's like a huge big word. So I'll say a structure that is self-sustainable in its own way, that is growth-oriented, meaning that it's planning for long-term, it has a vision like far into the future, and then that it's also I want to say self-propelled, but self-curating, in a sense that the processes that occur are actually contributing to essentially making sure that it's always running at optimum levels, right? That it's like clean data, it's running as it should, running updates if you want, checking for updates, doing maintenance, all that shit, right? So that's how I'll define it. But at least the 3 of them. You have what I call the hub, right? You have what I call the mastermind, or the hive mind, sorry. And then what I call, it's kind of funny, but I kind of just created a term, I think 2 semesters ago after taking database, what I call decentralized decentralization, which is kind of a play on the word on something it's actually presented on that course, right? So that's essentially what you get. And let's get into what all this means. Let's see. So, okay, the hub, if you want to think about it, it's quite simple. It's probably the one we're most familiar with. In the hub, what happens is, here's you go through a gate, right? If you pass the gate, you're given access to the database, right? You're given access to the database, and you're essentially allowed to roam free to your heart's content. That's the hub, right? It's quite common, really simple to implement, and it's probably the one most people find most of the time in their life. Right, so that's the hub. The other one is the hive mind. And hive mind works like a switch, if you want, or a network. So what that means is, here you are, right? You go through a gate. I always use the gate just for the sake of it. And then what happens is, now you meet this thing. Let's call it the hive mind, right? And essentially, it'll say, "What do you seek?" Kind of like the genie. And you'll tell it what you want, and from there on, it will essentially relay whatever it is that you want to the intended party in mind, right? So, for example, okay, if you want a picture, or if you want a particular picture, it's going to call whoever has that particular picture, and then it's going to bring it up for you, and so on, right? If you want a fucking video, it's going to call up the person that has the video, and then ask it to give it to you, or give it to the hive mind. Hive mind will receive it and then give it back to you, right? If you want whatever it is, essentially that's kind of how it works, right? And whatever you want, you need to ask it. And essentially, you're never given access to the whole thing, right? There's almost like this layer between, say, even you and the hive mind, and it's always protected that way. Like you don't really have access inside, as opposed to the hub, right? Anything you want, you essentially have to go through it. So that's another one. And then the third one, what I call the centralized decentralization, is essentially like this. Okay, you go through this gate, right? And then say you want a picture, right? Well, the thing is, okay, to get the picture, what you have to do is you have to follow this scavenger hunt, so to speak. And if you follow the scavenger hunt, it will lead you to all the things necessary to get the picture, right? So you'll go here, you'll ask whatever it is you want, and essentially what happens is, from here on, you go here, it tells you, okay, this is scavenger hunt, or this is the start of scavenger hunt, and then this is the point where you're led to in the scavenger hunt, led to, right? And every single one of these points is essentially tying to whatever it is you're asking for. And at the end, right, say this is the end, you will have the final piece, and then what will happen is everything will be put together and you'll have what you want, right? And that's literally how that works. I didn't really have any other way of putting it, but it's kind of, think of cash on a worldwide level, right? So, or just deployment on a worldwide level. Everyone has a piece, kind of like P2P, like P2P network, like if you've done BitTorrent or anything of that sort. That's essentially what that is, right? Everyone has a small piece of the file, and you essentially have to go to wherever it is that has the file, or the piece of the file that you want, to essentially get it, and then at the end you have the whole file, right? That's essentially how it works. So that's another architecture. And my point is, if you think about it, every single one of these architectures is going to have a unique way in the way that it displays its search results. In other words, the way that your search query results is displayed will directly dictate or give clue to the kind of architecture that you find yourself in. And my point is, why is this important? Because if you think about just how powerful everything that was just explained is, you realize that you can literally have anything that you desire on this world, in this reality, if you but search for it. If you but know how to use the search button. If you but know how to essentially find what it is that you're looking for. Next question now is, how do I know what keyword or what to type in? Well, like my friend, that is up to you to figure out. But my point is, through this video, through all the things that I've said, I hope that it at least gives you a clue as to where to start, right? Because if you know that this is what you're aiming for, then at least you have an idea of where you are in relation to it, right? So one interesting thing I wanted to mention in this is that I kind of look forward to the day that is soon coming where essentially you will have, for lack of a better word, something that is way more or multi-dimensional. Meaning, if you think about it, all of these things are, on some level, very physical based, or if you want to say spatial based, right? This is movement, even though it's digital movement, it's still movement, right? But then there will come a day when it's not even this anymore. It's not even, we're not even thinking about where data is. We're literally just thinking about your root essence, like your energy. Imagine like looking at someone's, like I used the word a while ago called life level IQ, and determining whether or not they were capable of even understanding or being able to handle the wisdom that they seek, right? And so based on that knowledge or based on that computation, you would then be able to say, okay, your query can be answered or your query cannot be answered, right? Like, imagine if, like, instead of just thinking about the gates and shit, it's like you go up to this thing, and if you are able to perceive the way to complete the symbol, right, then that means that you have the required IQ to essentially be able to use or do whatever it is that you want to do with the data, right? But it's not even tied to a password, or it's not even tied to like a security clearance, or even a relation to the data itself. Like, how close are you? Are you in the network or not? It's literally just like, are you able to handle it? If yes, then you would be able to easily prove it. And it'd be literally tied to everyone. It's like customize your own being. In the same way that, like, for example, when you make a search or you make a purchase, instantly, like, your search results, your feed, your technology actually reflects things that would be more suited to your liking, right? Like, things bubble up that you're more likely to click on or interact with, right? Or offers show up that you're more likely to actually at least take a gander at, right? In that same way, it's like your way of being would define the thing that makes it right, not even like a particular right answer per se. Sounds really heady, but I didn't know how else to put it, right? It's like some other next level Alien architecture. It's like mazes on top of new shit on top of other. I don't even know. Anyways, I don't know why, but I felt like throwing that in. Just kind of jot. Your brain has to. What's really possible, like don't square yourself or box yourself into like, okay, this is how it should be, blah blah blah. But always just think about what is the problem, and then you find a solution, and then you start being like, okay, is this the best solution? And then you're like, okay, what is the problem domain? But just always think of that. What is the solution, or what is the problem solving? 100% of the time, I believe that things fail because people do not know the true answer of that problem. Like, true in the sense, like, if I were to say, are you willing to walk to your death or put your life on the line because you're 100% sure of your answer? That truth. Anyways. Don't even get heady. I was really fucking meta. I don't even know if that made sense. But anyways, that was quite a fucking mouthful. I apologize to my shitty English. I know, like, it's really bad, and I don't even know if I make sense at times, but really strive to clarify my viewpoints, my ideas, with clear sentences and good words, articulation, all for your benefit. Anyways, hope you guys get something out of this, and as always, swag fuck out.